again Strickler with green cover seed. What I have here on the screen is a picture that I took in the heat of the summer drought of the year 2012. And you can see obviously there's dead corn next to green growing native grass. And this is a river bottom field, and you can see the corn is dead clear to the river. And where the photo was taken was a gravel hilltop, very poor water holding capacity. But the native grass is still green and the corn is dead. Why? The first thing people tell me is that the native grass has this huge, monstrous root system that's able to extract moisture, while corn has a very small root system. And that's true. But if that were the only explanation, explain to me why the only green corn in this entire field is the row right next to the native grass. If it's the only explanation is that this native grass has a huge root system that's able to extract water, shouldn't this row of corn right here have been the first corn in the field to die instead of the only surviving corn? What is going on here? Well, if you could dig up those roots on that corn right here or the native grass, what you would find is that those roots are colonized with all these little threads. This is mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi is a beneficial fungus that colonizes plant roots. It's supposed to be on just about every terrestrial land plant. It's found in native ecosystems like the native grass that I showed you. But it tends to be missing from our crop ground. We'll talk more about that later. But this fungus, unlike a parasitic fungus, is a beneficial fungus. Helps the plant do a lot of things. And most of our crop plants are colonized by mycorrhizal fungi. You can see that basically all grasses, most of our broadleaf plants, legumes, most of our fruit and nut crops are colonized by mycorrhizal fungi. So this is an organism that can convey benefits to an awful lot of plants. And then there are some plants that do not respond to mycorrhizal fungi. You can see that a lot of these, although we do have some crops in here, we also have a lot of weed species. Smart weeds, pig weeds, lamb's quarters do not respond to mycorrhizal fungi. Now, the difference between plants that are colonized with mycorrhizal fungi and ones that are not. These are root hairs on a corn root system, and these are a few millimeters long at best. Mycorrhizal hyphae can extend up to 18 to 24 inches away from those roots. So instead of a few millimeters that plant can access water away from the root system, a colonized plant with mycorrhizal fungi can access up to 2 feet past the root system. That's a huge increase in the ability to access water and nutrients. So what does mycorrhizal fungi do for the plant? Well, one of the first benefits is an increase in root mass. Here are some corn plants, and you can see a very small root system here, and on the inoculated control, much bigger root system. So that's one benefit. Improved drought tolerance. Of course, if you have bigger roots, you're going to have access to more water in the soil. Here's a study done at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls, and you can see they took inoculated corn plants and corns without mycorrhizal fungi, deprived them of water, and measured the days until each plant died. The inoculated plants lasted 30% longer. And you can see, here's a photo from a field, side by side, untreated plants, treated plants, quite a bit better vigor. Okay, another thing is faster crop establishment. Because the mycorrhizal hyphae can grow much faster than what the root system of a plant can, it can access more water, more nutrients, put more energy into growth, because those hyphae are able to do a lot of what the root system is unable to do in the early seedling stage. You can see this picture from an alfalfa field in Arizona, treated, untreated, big difference in how fast that crop established. The biggest differences in establishment rate will be on perennial crops, like alfalfa, native grass, fruit trees. Big difference in perennial crops, but also a difference in annual crops as well. Reduction of disease pressure is another one. The reason this is, and maybe you can make this out, you can see this is plant tissue. Here, here's the conductive tissue of the root, and this layer here is fungal tissue from the mycorrhizal hyphae. It coats that root with a layer of chitin. Chitin is a polysaccharide protein complex that is not found in plant tissue, only in fungal tissue and a few other organisms. It's essentially the same thing that makes up the shells of crabs and lobsters and crayfish. Pathogens that attack root cells don't have the chitinase enzyme that it takes to break through this layer. So it's really kind of a protective coating. It's like rhino coat for your plant roots. It just hardens it up and protects it from those root attacking pathogens. Reduction in nematode pressure. A lot of that is due to the same chitin protective layer. Now some people have worse nematode problems than others. Tend to have sandy soil has worse nematode problems. Irrigated soils a lot of times, river bottoms, because of the way nematode eggs are spread during flood events, oftentimes have worse nematode issues. Some crops are affected more by nematodes than others. Things like sugar beets, potatoes, root crops are particularly affected by nematodes. There are even some mycorrhizal organisms, like this one, that has these little ring-like structures, and these exude a pheromone that I guess you would say is like a Axe body wash for nematodes. It emits a scent that nematodes find irresistible, and they will try to swim through this loop, and when it does, it triggers this loop to swell up like an inner tube, catch that nematode, and once that nematode is trapped, this thing will shoot root-like structures called haustoria into the nematode, inject it with digestive enzymes, and feed it, dissolve it, kill it, dissolve it, render it into plant nutrients, and transfer it down this mycorrhizae and into the plant. So it turns that pest into fertilizer. What a slick deal. Now this organism is not yet commercially available, but it will be at some point in time. Okay, of course, one of the biggest functions of roots is nutrient uptake, and a colonized plant is going to have better nutrient uptake. Here's a study, and you can see this is on wheat, and look at this. Here's without mycorrhizae and without phosphorus fertilizer. Here's where they added phosphorus fertilizer. You get a little bit of nutrient uptake improvement, but this is mycorrhizae without phosphorus fertilizer. Mycorrhizae actually did a better job than the fertilizer did. And when you add the two together, it's better yet. And you look at mycorrhizae actually helps benefit the uptake of all kinds of nutrients, not just phosphorus, but you look at what this is doing. Control versus the mycorrhizae, double, a little bit better. About 50% better, roughly double, almost 4 times more zinc, almost 3 times the copper, almost 50% more manganese, almost double the iron. I mean, this is not only good for the plant, but what do we do with this plant? We eat it. This is improving the quality of nutrition. And if you've been following studies on nutrient density of plants over the years, the nutrient density of our crops and our produce has been declining Alarmingly, over the past few decades, the reintroduction of mycorrhizal fungi to our crops can help make a more nutrient-dense, healthier plant. And that not only helps the plant, that helps the animals or the people that eat those plants. If it's sounding like a late-night infomercial for this, I mean, this is like ShamWow. I mean, it just does everything. There's more. If you order before midnight tonight, we will throw in improved soil structure. The hyphae of mycorrhizal fungi secrete a lubricant called glomalin that is a very powerful soil aggregating agent. It has a much longer half-life in the soil than other soil aggregating agents like humic acid or fulvic acid. Lasts several times longer, much more persistent, and much more effective. Here is over here is an inoculated oat plant. This is taken about 75 days after planting. This one was not inoculated. Notice how much darker this is, how much better aggregate that soil is. This one just melted away. That was just falling away. This, the soil clung to the root system, was just visibly better, had that black cottage cheese appearance that you really want in the soil. So it's much more desirable, and this happened in just 75 days. That's really pretty amazing to me how much improvement we got in a very short period of time in that soil. And these plants were plucked about 3 feet apart, just on either side of the treatment line. This is a picture, a microscope picture of a little ped of soil, a little tiny clod, and the glomalin has been treated so that it glows under ultraviolet light. So all this glow-in-the-dark stuff you see, maybe you can see the little hyphae here, and the glomalin is richer around the hyphae. This is the glue that literally holds the soil together. And you also get organic matter content. This is the soil carbon with and without mycorrhizal inoculation. This is the soil, bare soil growing nothing. This is soil, the same soil with tall fescue in it. And you would expect that this would have a lot more carbon in it. But remember, for plants to improve, plants alone to improve your soil carbon content, they have to die and decay. But when you have mycorrhizal fungi out there, they are exuding glomalin into the soil and making soil organic matter while the plant's still alive. That's very important. You can get soil improvement from a cover crop. A cash crop can be improving the soil as well at the same time that plant's growing. You don't have to wait for death and decay for all that soil improvement to happen. And the hyphae, you got hyphae here. This is hyphae, this is hyphae, this is hyphae. All these things here are beneficial bacteria. These are beneficial rhizosphere organisms that enhance the growth of plants. They fight off diseases. These things will go out and eat rock particles and make the nutrients in them available to other plants. When you inoculate a plant with mycorrhizal fungi, it'll have about 1,000 times more of these beneficial bacteria compared to an uncolonized plant. That's huge, especially as we start to figure out what the roles of some of these microorganisms are, and learn how to manipulate them a little better, take advantage of all the processes that they can do. This is the next frontier in agriculture. I really believe that rather than some space-age gadget that we're going to develop, the next frontier in agriculture will be understanding the natural processes that take place in that rhizosphere and how we can harness them. Okay? This is how Quick Roots, which is another microbial product. Quick Roots and mycorrhizal fungi are two completely different organisms. There's actually 2 organisms in Quick Roots. One is a fungus, the other is a bacteria. They're legitimate, useful products. But by themselves, they have limited effect. I mean, it's good. That's a very beneficial response. But look what happens when you add mycorrhizal fungi, the myco-apply, and the quick roots together. Having the mycorrhizal fungi in there creates that much more additional habitat surface area for the quick roots organisms to colonize. Very, very synergistic effect with any beneficial root organism when it's applied in combination with mycorrhizal fungi. I think the mycorrhizal fungi is the critical first step in restoring those beneficial root organisms. And this is just one case study. This happens to be my farm. Took a picture of my subsoil in November of 2013. The little arrow there indicates the 18-inch root depth. At the time this was taken, I did not have, that was basically the depth to which I had black granular soil. You can see below that, it looks like gray, poorly aerated, poorly structured Play-Doh. In the next spring, I inoculated this field with mycorrhizal fungi. You can see 6 months or so, this would be 9 months. In March of 2014, I inoculated this mycorrhizal fungi. You can see not quite a year later, look at the little dark streaks following the root channels. This is from a control area that was not inoculated. Look at how much darker and how much more structure is occurring where those roots are. That's the glomalin that you're seeing. And then a year and a half after that, look at the difference in soil structure. Look at the difference in root penetration. We turned gray, massive, structureless clay into well aerated, full of roots, black, crumbly topsoil. This is absolutely amazing. Now this was Eastern Gamagrass, plant with a very good reputation for improving soil. But when you use that perennial plant as a host for the mycorrhizal fungi, it's like gasoline and fire. I mean, you really start things going. Hey, and then this is of considerable interest now. You get a reduction in the growth of several weed species. Like I said earlier, the beginning of this presentation, there's a lot of weed species that are not benefited by mycorrhizal fungi. In the absence of mycorrhizal fungi, those plants evolved different nutrient and water uptake mechanisms. They just have a superior root system to our crops. Our crops are supposed to have mycorrhizal fungi, but in most cases they don't have it, and I'll explain why here in a bit. But when you inoculate your crop with mycorrhizal fungi, you change that balance of power to where the crop root system can outcompete the weed root system. This is a study done up at North Dakota, at North Dakota State. Look at this. This is the weed biomass in a sunflower crop. This is where they did not inoculate with mycorrhizal fungi. Here's where they did. 54% fewer weeds. And that's just weed biomass. Didn't kill the weeds, just really stunted their growth, so that your crop had the competitive advantage instead of the weed. And then of course you get better yields. And again, it sounds like I'm sounding like the snake oil salesman from the Outlaw Josie Wales. This cures everything. I mean, it cures flat feet and bad breath and sprained ankles. Mycorrhizae fixes everything. And that's actually pretty close. And you're probably listening to this saying, well, is this just some other snake oil cure-all? Well, I can guarantee you this absolutely unretouched photo shows the snake that we extract this oil from. Now, this stuff is not snake oil. It is legitimate biology. This is a part of nature that we are supposed to have. You say, well, has this stuff been researched? Yeah, actually, it's been researched ad nauseum. If you go to Google Scholar, Google Scholar is a search engine that searches only published university research. You put in mycorrhizal fungi in that search bar and hit send, and you can come up with, I just did this the other day, I come up with 105,000 published university research articles on mycorrhizal fungi. If you want to dial this down, there are approximately 4 times as many studies with mycorrhizal fungi on corn than there are anhydrous ammonia on corn. 4 times the research body on mycorrhizal fungi than there is on anhydrous ammonia. That should tell you something. Nobody questions the effectiveness of anhydrous ammonia in boosting corn yields. But for some reason there's still questions among, there is no question among scientists. Scientists are well aware of this. It's just only recently been commercially available. So we don't have the level of practical experience. This is measured the yield increase on alfalfa. This is alfalfa in California. Look at this, 21% increase by inoculating with mycorrhizal fungi. Okay. Now, you say, well, if this stuff's so great, you said, wait a minute, this stuff occurs naturally. Don't we already have this stuff? Well, the problem is we do have this in natural ecosystems, forests, prairies, places that have never been plowed and never been fallowed. Because these organisms have to have a living root system in order to survive. In the absence of a living root, stuff dies. So when we converted perennial ecosystems that have never been tilled, we plowed them, let them lay fallow, grew annual plants with long rest periods in between a live root, the stuff dies off. And you can see that as this fallow period goes from 3 to 6 weeks, we were able to keep some alive. We go to 14 to 20 weeks between crops, and look at this, very little of that mycorrhizal fungi. An effective level of colonization really is about 30%. You know, only corn planted immediately. This is double crop after wheat, in case you're wondering. So when you wait 3 to 6 weeks to put in corn, it's still effective. None of these other options are. You really need to eliminate fallow to keep mycorrhizal fungi alive. And because we haven't done this really on our cropland for 150 years, you might as well consider most of our cropland effectively devoid of mycorrhizal fungi. That explains why I'm an advocate of re-inoculating. You can, very seldom do we ever find a field when we check that is absent, completely absent of mycorrhizal fungi. But it might take 4 or 5 years to build those levels up through cover cropping alone. During that 4 or 5 years, you're missing out on the benefits. When you inoculate, you can get those benefits immediately and then manage to maintain them. Because this is the condition that so many of our fields have been subjected to for 150 years. Does this field look alive to you? Obviously this is a field from the Dust Bowl, but how many of our fields went through intense tillage, intense fallow, dying crops for years and years and years? How can you expect mycorrhizal fungi to survive the absence of any food source year after year after year? So when we examined treated samples, when we sent in paired samples between inoculated, uninoculated portions of the field, we seldom found 0% colonization. But when we inoculated, we got that this is not an effective amount. This is. So inoculation definitely improved our levels. We got benefits from it. So what soils? Only 6% of the untreated areas had adequate colonization. So if it's cropland, and all of those were recently cleared forests. If you are dealing with long-term cropland, I just assume you don't have it, at least not at levels that are adequate. Now, if it's been long-term no-till cover crop, non-fallow, perennial, maybe. But if it's just been regular cropland with long fallow periods, I just assume you don't have it. Now, what kind of soils do you get the best response on? Basically, the worst soils give you the best response because they're the ones most likely to need help with water and nutrient uptake. Soils that have been fumigated. That's mainly important for vegetable growers, places where they grow fruit trees. Any place that's been treated to fumigant probably has 0 mycorrhizal fungi. That's going to give a good response to inoculation. Anything that's been eroded or leveled, where the natural mycorrhizae will have been removed. Non-host crops, canola. I mean, there's a lot of places now, Oklahoma, where canola is becoming a big part of the crop rotation. Sugar beet growing areas. Sugar beets are a non-host. You might as well consider that a year of fallow. So the crops following canola, the crops following sugar beets, are going to be very responsive to inoculation. Anything that's been fallowed, I know this part of the world, wheat, fallow, has been a very common crop rotation as you get into western Kansas, panhandle of Nebraska, panhandle of Oklahoma, Texas. Those areas, wheat, fallow wheat was a very common crop rotation. That is just death on mycorrhizal fungi. Very high pH soils. Those high pH soils respond very well because the problem with high pH soils, especially high calcium soils, is that they tend to tie up micronutrients. When you inoculate crops on high pH soils with mycorrhizal fungi, those plants all of a sudden are able to access those micronutrients they couldn't before. So areas where there's iron deficiency, areas where there's zinc deficiency, copper, manganese, any of the nutrients that are very difficult to come by in a high pH soil, mycorrhizal colonized plants are able to get better. Salinity. This is really the best responses I've seen to mycorrhizal fungi have been on salty soils. Part of that is because the mycorrhizal fungi are able to access water against that salt, but also when the fungi take salt up, they tend to move the salt into a little structure, wall it off, and then seal it. So it's actually able to take salt out of the soil solution and lock it away for a long period of time. Really an amazing little process, but very dramatic. And of course, heavy clays and compacted soils, they really benefit from the glomalin. And the mycorrhizal fungi, the hyphae, are able to exert about 10 times the PSI of a root. Roots are usually unable to exert a pressure high enough to break, to push about 300 PSI is about the upper limit. Roots just stop growing there. But a fungus can penetrate about 1100 several times. Typically a root's about 110 PSI, mycorrhizal fungi, hyphae, about 1100. Much more pressure there. So how do we get this stuff on? Well, one thing you can do is you can do it yourself. We have this product, Myco-Apply Endoprime. This bag here, this bag here covers 80 acres. And it's really easy to use. You can put this, it's labeled for corn. This product we send out for people that are planting corn. It is actually compatible with starter fertilizer. You can put this right in the fertilizer tank. These spores are very resistant to fertilizer contact. And the fungicide that's put on seed does not bother it. So you can actually use this even with fungicide treated seed and put it right in the furrow along with starter fertilizer. 2x2 also works, not quite as effective as in furrow, and you don't have to use fertilizer as a carrier. You can use water, compost extract, compost tea, any of those will work as well. Any liquid that you can put this in that'll get it down in the furrow will work. And this is something we can sell you. This package covers 80 acres. Another way, use one of these. If you're wanting to have mycorrhizal fungi spores put onto a cover crop, just call us and we can just blend our own spores. We've got a product called Mycogrow that we can blend right into your cover crop mix, and you can get this stuff going in your field.